I always knew my daughter didn't love me. I had lived a long life, and to deceive myself at 77 would be the height of folly. My hands, covered in age spots, have long since stopped shaking when I think about that fact. Brianna just doesn't love me, and probably never has. From my office window, I can see almost the entire block. Neat houses with perfectly mowed lawns, wood-terraced patios, seasonal decorations on the doors. Waterloo is a town where time flows as slowly as molasses. I've lived here all my life, in a house I inherited from my parents. A two-story house with faded blue shutters, a small garden, and an old apple tree my father planted. For the third hour now, I've been sitting in my shabby leather chair, staring outside, waiting for my daughter's visit. She arrives every third Sunday of the month, right on schedule, as if fulfilling an obligation that cannot be canceled but can be endured. Along with her always comes her husband, Darren Hawthorne, a man with a perpetually fake smile and cold eyes. My life is now on a strict schedule. Up at 6, a light breakfast, a walk to the post office, reading the paper in Donna's cafe, a lonely lunch, watching TV, occasional calls to old friends from the waterworks where I've worked for 42 years, dinner and sleep. I used to go to retired engineers' meetings, but since my stroke 3 years ago, a lot has changed. My mind remained clear, but my body began to give way. The doorbell rang at 2 o'clock sharp. I knew it was them because Brianna has a key, but she never uses it, as if stepping through my door unannounced was too intimate an act. "Dad!" Brianna's voice sounded cheerful, but I'd long ago learned to recognize the falseness in her tone. "How are you?" I stood up, leaning on the cane more than I needed to. Since my stroke, I'd noticed that the more helpless I looked, the happier my daughter became. "Come in." I opened the door wider. "I'm fine, as always." Darren walked past me with barely a nod. He was dressed in light beige pants and a short-sleeved shirt, like he was going golfing, not visiting an elderly relative. Brianna kissed my cheek, a light touch of lips, like a butterfly that immediately flies away. "We brought you lunch from Verdi's." She held out a paper bag with the fancy restaurant's logo on it. "Their baked salmon is delicious." I accepted the package, knowing that inside would be a neatly wrapped portion the size of a child's palm. Brianna always chose the most diet-friendly meals for me, concerned for my health, as she said. But I sometimes felt like she just wanted to control every aspect of my life, even the number of calories I consumed. "Thank you," I said, setting the bag aside on the hallway table. "Tea? Coffee?" "Oh, don't worry," Brianna said quickly. "We've just had a snack. Let's just sit and talk." We went into the living room, a room that hadn't changed in 30 years. The same cream-colored walls, the same heavy curtains, the same sofa with faded upholstery. After Eleanor, my wife, had died, I saw no point in changing anything. Brianna immediately started looking around as she did on every visit. I'd noticed it a long time ago, her gaze sliding over the furniture, the paintings on the walls, the antique clock in the corner. She wasn't looking at my house like the place she'd grown up in, but like a piece of merchandise at an auction. "Daddy, don't you think these curtains are too heavy? They don't let the light in," she said as she went to the window, "and the carpet's worn out. Maybe it's time to redecorate." "I like my house the way it is," I said quietly, settling into my chair. Darren settled back on the couch, stretching his legs out and checking something on his phone. He rarely participated in our conversations unless it was about money or real estate. "You know, Dad," Brianna took a seat next to her husband. "Darren and I were looking at a really nice place the other day. You remember Mrs. Patterson? She moved to Sunny Slopes last year and she really likes it there. Oh, here it is. Sunny Slopes is a nursing home on the outskirts of town. Brianna started mentioning it about a year ago, first sort of casually and now openly. Good for Mrs. Patterson," I smiled, watching my daughter's face tense slightly. "But I prefer to stay in my own house." But Daddy, Brianna stepped forward, there are nurses there to monitor your blood pressure, organized activities, companionship. And here, you're all alone. I'm not alone, I objected. I have Winton, he and I play chess on Tuesdays. I have Donna from the cafe, who always remembers that I love my cinnamon coffee. There's Mrs. Ramsey next door who sometimes brings me blueberry pie. Darren pulled away from the phone and exchanged a glance with Brianna. Chambers, he always addressed me by my first name, never calling me dad or father-in-law, is not the same as professional care. After your stroke, the doctors said a recurrence was possible. What if you fall and can't get help? I have a panic button. I pointed to the device on my wrist. And I'm not going to fall. Brianna sighed with that peculiar expression she got whenever I was being stubborn. Dad, we're just worried about you. This house is too big for one person. It costs money to maintain. And Sunny Slopes is... Brianna, I interrupted her gently but firmly, I'm still sane and capable of making decisions. I'm not moving out of my house. Period. There was an awkward pause. Darren was staring at his phone again and Brianna pursed her lips. Okay, she finally said. Let's leave it at that for now. How's your health? Are you taking your meds? The next hour passed in superficial conversations. Brianna talked about her job at a cybersecurity company, how she and Darren were thinking about buying a new car, and their plans to go on vacation. Darren would occasionally throw in a few words, mostly when it came to money. I nodded and asked questions in the right places, giving the illusion of interest. At one point, Brianna got up and said she needed to go to the bathroom. When she left the room, Darren was back on his phone, and I pretended to doze off in my chair. But through closed eyelids, I watched as my brother-in-law got up and began to walk quietly around the room, looking at the items on the shelves, stopping at the paintings. He even walked over to the antique secretaire and pulled one of the drawers out slightly, examining its contents. When Brianna returned, I noticed that she wasn't in the bathroom but going upstairs. I could hear the creak of the floorboards on the stairs. She often did this, ostensibly checking to see if everything was okay in my bedroom or if there were any leaks in the bathroom. But I knew she was really just looking around the house, assessing its condition. Daddy, did you doze off? She asked as she entered the room. I woke up, pretending to be slightly disoriented. I'm sorry, dear. At my age, sleep comes unexpectedly. That's okay, she smiled, but her eyes remained cold. We should probably get going. Darren has a video conference at 6 today. I glanced at my watch. It was only 4. Their visits were getting shorter and shorter. Of course I understand. Busy people. I started to rise, leaning on my cane. Stay seated, Dad. Brianna made a soothing gesture. We'll find our own way out. Chambers, Darren nodded to me. I'll see you later. They headed for the exit, but I got up and followed, moving slower than usual. Brianna turned around at the door. Don't forget your pills, Dad, and please think about what we talked about. Sunny Slopes is a really nice place. I smiled and waved at them as I stood on the doorstep. As their car disappeared around the corner, my smile disappeared. I straightened up, no longer leaning on my cane, and walked back into the house, locking the door with 2 locks. Instead of returning to the living room, I went up to the second floor, to my bedroom. Opening the closet, I pulled out the small digital recorder I'd set under the dresser after their last visit. Winton, my friend and former lawyer, had advised me to do this when I shared my suspicions with him. Document everything, Chambers, he said then. If they're plotting something against you, you're going to need proof. I went back downstairs, made myself some strong tea, and sat down at the kitchen table. Taking out my tape recorder, I turned on the tape. The first few minutes were filled with noises, footsteps, creaking furniture, muffled voices from the living room. But then, as Brianna went upstairs, I heard Darren's clear voice speaking on the phone. Yeah, I'm at his place now. No, the old man is still being stubborn about the nursing home. Of course, the house is worth a fortune, especially after the neighborhood has become so trendy. No, I think we'll have to go through a power of attorney. Yeah, after his stroke, he signed it. The realtor and I have already discussed a preliminary appraisal. As soon as the place is available, we can put it on the market. No, Brianna can handle it. She knows how to be persuasive when it comes to her father. I turned off the tape, feeling the cold rage building up inside. As soon as a spot becomes available, they're waiting for me to die or be incapacitated so they can sell my house. My house where I've lived my whole life, where I raised Brianna, where I buried my wife. I sat still for a long time, staring out the window at the garden path I'd laid out in stone 30 years ago. Then I slowly picked up my teacup and took a sip. The tea was already cold, but I didn't care. I now had confirmation of what I had guessed for a long time. My daughter and her husband see me as an obstacle that needs to be removed to gain access to my property. They are already discussing selling the house with a realtor. They are already planning to use the power of attorney I signed after my stroke to facilitate Brianna's ability to help me with payments and bills. Brianna has always been practical. Even as a child, she favored concrete toys over abstract ones. She has grown into a woman who values efficiency and results. I should have anticipated that her attitude toward me would also be practical. An old father who occupies a valuable home and will probably die or become incapacitated soon. It makes sense to use this situation to my best advantage. But one thing they don't know is that I'm not the helpless old man they think I am. My mind is still sharp and I can see right through them. If they think they can just wait for me to die or put me in a nursing home to take my property, they are sorely mistaken. I straightened up in my chair, feeling something inside wake up that I hadn't felt in a long time. Determination. I will not be a victim. I will not watch helplessly as my own children try to strip me of my dignity and possessions. I glanced at the wall calendar. 3 weeks until their next visit. Enough time to spring into action. They don't suspect that I've been noticing their greedy glances, their fake concern, their impatience for quite some time. They don't know that I'm still capable of defending myself, and they certainly don't expect me to be able to strike back. I picked up my phone and dialed Winton's number. My old friend answered after the third ring. "Vinton, it's Chambers. I need your help. You were right about Brianna and Darren. They're planning to sell my house using power of attorney." "Damn it, Chambers, I was hoping I was wrong." Vinton's voice sounded tired. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the recorder on the table in front of me and felt a smile appear on my lips that wasn't reflected in my eyes. "I'm going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget." Winton Slade showed up on my doorstep at exactly 10 in the morning, just as we had agreed. In spite of his 79 years, he retained the straight posture and keen eye that had distinguished him during his time as a district attorney. Now his gray hair was neatly combed back, and in his hand he held a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had been around since the 60s. "You look lousy, Chambers," he said in lieu of greeting as he came into the house. "You're still as tactful as ever," I grinned, locking the door behind him. We walked into the kitchen where I'd already made coffee. Winton lowered himself into a chair and put his briefcase on the table. "So," he took the cup I handed him, "tell me everything from the beginning." I pulled out my tape recorder and turned on the recording of Darren's conversation. Winton listened without interrupting, his eyebrows slowly shifting to form a deep wrinkle on the bridge of his nose. "So, power of attorney," he said when the tape ended. "I remember I warned you not to sign it." "You did," I agreed. "But I still believed in my daughter's good intentions." Winton shook his head. "Well, what's done is done. What is the extent of this trust? Is it complete?" "No," I shook my head. "Only to manage my financial affairs in the event of my incapacity. But after that stroke, the doctor wrote in his report that I might have periods of confusion. That might be enough." Winton tapped his fingers on the table. "If your daughter can find a doctor who can confirm that you're incapable of making financial decisions, she can act on your behalf. And given that her husband is in contact with a realtor, they're planning to sell the house without me, I finished for him. Exactly. And maybe put you in that sunny side or whatever it's called. Winton took a sip of coffee. What do you want to do? I stood up and walked over to the window. My garden always looked especially beautiful in the early morning. The dewdrops on the grass, the fresh air, the silence. I want to teach them a lesson, I said at last. But not just revenge. I want them to realize what they've done. I want them to feel what it's like when the people closest to you betray you. Winton grinned. You know, Chambers, in 50 years of our friendship, I've never seen you truly angry. It's an interesting sight. I'm not angry, I countered, though that wasn't entirely true. I just want justice. And how do you envision that justice? I went back to the table and sat down across from Winton. You remember Prentice Lowell? Your co-worker at the water company? The one who moved to Mexico? Yeah, I nodded. He's been living in Mexico City for 7 years. I got a letter from him recently. He invited me to come, saying that life there is cheaper, the climate is better, and many American retirees are moving there. And you're thinking of moving? Winton raised his eyebrows. At your age? Why not? I shrugged. What's keeping me here? A daughter waiting for me to die, the house she plans to sell, or maybe the endless gray days and cold winters. Winton looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, let's say. But what does that have to do with your situation with Brianna and Darren? I smiled. Directly. They want to sell my house and fly to Mexico. That's fine. Let them do that. But by my rules. For the next 2 hours, Winton and I worked out a plan. My old friend asked questions, pointed out weaknesses, suggested alternatives. By noon, the general outline of the plan was clear. It's risky, Chambers, Winton said, closing his notebook. If something goes wrong, you could lose everything. What do I have to lose? I shrugged. The house they're going to sell anyway? A relationship with a daughter who sees me as a liability? Your money, for instance. Winton tapped his finger on the table. Transferring a large sum of money to a Mexican bank is not like putting money in the account across the street. Prentice has been using that bank for 7 years, I countered. He says he's never had any problems. All right, let's say. Winton didn't sound convinced. But you need someone reliable here in Waterloo, someone to play the part of your house buyer. Do you have any ideas? Winton thought for a moment. There is one man, Terrence Clapton, a former client. He's a real estate investor. He's reliable, trusted. I could talk to him. Would he be willing to take on a case like this? If we pay him a commission, why not? Winton shrugged. It would be just another deal for him. I nodded. All right, you talk to him, and I'll contact Prentice and get the details on the bank and the real estate in Mexico City. Winton stood up, gathering his papers into his briefcase. Chambers, are you sure you want to go to such extreme measures? Shouldn't you just talk to Brianna, tell her you know what her plans are? I shook my head. She'd deny it, and then she'll be even more careful. No, Winton, talking won't help. They have to experience betrayal firsthand. After Winton left, I sat down at the computer. In my 77 years, I was well versed in modern technology, a necessity when you live alone. I wrote a letter to Prentice detailing the situation and my plan. Then I began researching information about banks in Mexico, the rules for transferring large sums of money abroad, and the laws on foreigners buying real estate. By late afternoon, my eyes were watering from the strain, but I learned a lot. It turned out that foreigners can own real estate in Mexico, but there are restrictions for coastal areas. Fortunately, Mexico City was inland, so there shouldn't be any problems. Opening an account in a Mexican bank required a passport, a visa, and a local address. Prentice could help with that. The next day, I called my bank and made an appointment with a manager. Geraldine Pierce had worked at the bank for 20 years, and we knew each other well. Mr. Morton, she smiled welcomingly as I entered her office. What can I do for you? Geraldine, I need to discuss transferring some of my savings overseas, I said bluntly. Her smile faded slightly. Overseas? May I ask for what purpose? I'm thinking of buying real estate in Mexico, I answered. An old friend of mine lives there and says it's a great place for retirees. I see. Geraldine nodded, though she seemed surprised. How much do you plan to transfer? I said the amount, and her eyebrows raised slightly. It's a significant portion of your savings, Mr. Morton. Are you sure? Absolutely, I smiled. Don't worry, Geraldine. I'm not going to transfer all my money. I'll leave a sufficient amount here. We discussed the details of the transfer, the fees, and the time frame. Geraldine explained that such a large amount of money would require additional verification and approval, but there shouldn't be any problems, given my impeccable credit history. Just please be careful, Mr. Morton, she said lastly. There's been an increase in elderly fraud lately, especially with overseas transfers. I'll be very careful, I assured her, not realizing that the only scammers in my life were my own daughter and her husband. In the evening, I received a reply from Prentice. He was surprised by my letter but expressed his willingness to help. He confirmed that the bank he was using was reliable and offered his help with the real estate paperwork. He also mentioned that there was a small but cozy villa for sale not far from his house that might be a good fit for me. I never thought you would dare to take such a step, Chambers, he wrote, but frankly, it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. The climate here is fine, the people are friendly, and the cost of living is much lower than in the States. Your pension here will be more than enough to live comfortably. I kept his letter and the contacts of the bank and realtor he recommended. The next day, Winton called. I talked to Terrence, he said without preamble. He's willing to help, but he wants to meet in person to discuss the details. When? Tomorrow at 11, in my office. Can you make it? Sure, I replied. See you tomorrow. Winton's office was in a small building in downtown Waterloo. Even though he'd officially retired 5 years ago, he still consulted for a few old clients and kept a small office space. Terrence Clapton appeared to be an energetic man in his 50s, with short-cropped graying hair and attentive eyes. He shook my hand firmly and got down to business without further ado. Winton has explained your situation to me, Mr. Morton, he said. Let me get this straight. You want me to be the buyer of your house, to enter into a formal contract of sale with your daughter acting under a power of attorney, but the money will actually be returned to you. Exactly, I confirmed. Less your commission, of course. Terrence rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It's an unconventional deal, but it's not illegal if you do it right. In fact, you're just selling your real estate through an intermediary. That's right, I nodded. I want it to be legal. No fraud. Okay. Terrence pulled out a notebook. Tell me more about the house. Address, square footage, condition. I gave him all the information about the house, including the last appraisal I did 2 years ago. Since then, real estate prices in your neighborhood have gone up about 15%, Terrence said. Your house is worth considerably more now. All the better, I smiled. More money for my new life in Mexico. What about the deeds? Terrence asked. Is your daughter's power of attorney valid? Completely, Vinton interjected. I checked. She can act on Chambers' behalf in financial matters if there is a medical report that he is temporarily incapacitated. And that would be the case, I nodded. I'll take care of it. My daughter takes me to see Dr. Sanders regularly. He's a good man, but he's too trusting. If I'm convincing enough of my confusion, he'll write what's needed. Terrence looked at me carefully. Mr. Morton, I have to ask, are you absolutely sure you want to take this step? Breaking up with your family, moving to another country at your age are serious decisions. I've never been more sure, I replied firmly. My family has already decided to get rid of me. I'm just one step ahead of them. Terrence nodded. In that case, I'm willing to help. My commission will be 5% of the transaction amount. That's the standard rate for this kind of transaction. It's a deal. I extended my hand to him, and we sealed the agreement with a handshake. After the meeting with Terrence, Winton and I went to a small cafe nearby. "Are you really ready to leave Waterloo?" Winton asked as we settled down at a table. "Your whole life is here, Chambers." "Was," I corrected him. "Eleanor died 10 years ago. Most of our friends are gone too. Those who are left are too busy with their illnesses and grandchildren. What's keeping me here?" "I don't know," Winton shrugged. "Habit? Comfort? Fear of change?" "I was afraid of change when I was 30, I grinned. "Now I'm 77 and I've realized one simple truth. If I don't manage change in my life, others will. And I don't know if I'll like the results." Winton shook his head thoughtfully. "You know, Chambers, I always thought of you as a quiet, predictable man. Who would have thought you were such an adventurer?" "I didn't know it myself," I admitted. "Apparently, it takes your own daughter deciding to sell your house behind your back to be an adventurer." We both laughed, though there was bitterness in that laugh. I spent the next 2 weeks actively preparing for the realization of my plan. I called Prentice, consulted with a Mexican bank, studied information about the life of American retirees in Mexico. At the same time, I began to gradually increase my deterioration. More often complained about forgetfulness, sometimes pretended that I did not recognize familiar people, while talking on the phone with Brianna several times lost the thread of conversation. "Daddy, are you all right?" she asked with a concern in her voice that now seemed so fake to me. Yes, dear. Just a little tired," I answered, making my voice weak and unsure. "You know, I've been forgetting a lot of what I wanted to say lately. Dr. Sanders says it's normal for my age. Maybe you should see a specialist." She sounded very hopeful. "I can arrange a consultation with a good neurologist." "I don't think that's necessary," I said hesitantly. "Maybe you're right, though. Last time I forgot to turn off the gas, Mrs. Ramsey had to ring my doorbell." "What? Dad, it's dangerous." Brianna sounded really worried now. "I'll come down this weekend and we'll be sure to make a doctor's appointment." "Whatever you say, honey," I sighed into the phone. "You always know what's best." After that conversation, I called Dr. Sanders and made an appointment. I needed to set the stage for a medical opinion that would allow Brianna to use the power of attorney. On the day of the doctor's appointment, I purposely wore a shirt with the wrong buttons and different socks. In the waiting room, I pretended I couldn't remember my date of birth and was confused about the names of the months. Dr. Sanders, an older man with kind eyes, listened carefully to my complaints of forgetfulness and confusion. "Mr. Morton, given your age and your stroke, some cognitive decline is not surprising," he said after the examination. "But I'm concerned about the speed of these changes. Perhaps we should do some more tests." "Doctor, frankly, I don't want to go through all these procedures." I made a tired gesture with my hand. "I'm 77 years old and I realize my mind isn't what it used to be. I just want to know if I can still live alone or if I should consider other options." Dr. Sanders looked at me thoughtfully. "Mr. Morton, if you forget to turn off the gas, it can really be dangerous. Is there someone who could visit you regularly, or perhaps a caregiver for a few hours a day?" "My daughter suggests a nursing home." I paused deliberately, as if trying to remember the name. "Sunnyside, something out there." "Sunny Slopes?" the doctor prompted. "Yes, it's a good institution, but this is a major step. Are you ready for this change in your life?" I lowered my eyes, feigning humility. "I don't know, doctor. It's hard for me to make these decisions on my own. Maybe Brianna's right and I need help." Dr. Sanders ended up prescribing me a mild sedative and recommended a neurological consultation. But most importantly, he put a note in my chart about intermittent confusion and impaired short-term memory, which may make it difficult to make complex financial decisions. This is exactly what was required to activate the power of attorney. As I walked out of the doctor's office, there was a strange feeling on my mind. On the one hand, I didn't like deceiving Dr. Sanders, who had always treated me well. On the other hand, I knew it was a necessary part of my plan. That evening, I called Winton. Everything is going according to plan, I informed him. Dr. Sanders had made the necessary entry. Now Brianna can use the power of attorney. Are you sure she'll use it? Winton asked. Maybe your daughter is better than you think. She called me right after the appointment, I answered. Said she'd spoken to Dr. Sanders, and he was concerned about my condition. She offered to come back next week and help me with my financial paperwork. Said I needed to get things in order. Do you know what that means? I do. Winton sighed heavily. Well then, we'll proceed as planned. Terrence is ready. He's already prepared all the paperwork for the deal. I looked out the window, at my garden in the evening sun. The apple tree planted by my father swayed slightly in the wind. I felt a little sad at the thought that soon I might never see this house again. But then I remembered Darren's cold eyes and Brianna's fake concern, and my resolve returned. Okay, I said firmly. Once Brianna and Darren make their move, we'll make ours. Brianna arrived the following Tuesday alone, without Darren. She was dressed in a strict gray suit and looked like a businesswoman who had come to deal with important matters. I met her in my robe, slightly disheveled, with a cup of cooled tea in my hands. "Daddy, weren't you going out today?" she asked, kissing me on the cheek. "I told you I was coming to help with the paperwork." "Yeah?" I gave her a confused look. "I'm sorry, darling, I must have forgotten. I've been forgetting a lot of things lately." Brianna sighed with barely perceptible irritation, but quickly hid it under a mask of concern. "It's no big deal. Why don't you go get dressed and I'll make some fresh tea?" I obediently headed upstairs, leaving my daughter in the kitchen. Through the small slit in my bedroom door, I could see that she, left alone, had begun to examine the contents of the kitchen table drawers where I kept some papers. Her search was methodical and purposeful. She knew exactly what she was looking for. Once dressed, I intentionally fiddled with my shoelaces for a long time, giving Brianna plenty of time for her reconnaissance. When I finally made it downstairs, she was already sitting at her desk with 2 cups of fresh tea and a folder of papers. "I found your bank statements, Dad," she said, pointing to the folder. "I think we should get everything organized so it's easier for you to keep track of your spending." "You take such good care of me," I smiled, taking a seat next to her. "Darren's not with you today?" "He has an important meeting." Brianna opened the folder. "Dad, I spoke to Dr. Sanders after your visit. He's concerned about your condition." "Yeah?" I acted surprised, but he didn't say anything to me. "He didn't want to worry you." Brianna put her hand on mine. "But he thinks it's getting harder for you to handle everyday things, especially the finances." "But I've always managed my own money," I frowned, acting stubborn. "And you did fine," Brianna said diplomatically. "But Dad, you're getting older, and after that stroke, do you remember when you signed the document that allowed me to help you with your financial matters?" "Vaguely." I rubbed my forehead. "That was after the hospital, wasn't it?" "Exactly," Brianna smiled. "It's a power of attorney. It allows me to act on your behalf if you can't make your own decisions. And from what Dr. Sanders says, that's exactly the situation right now. I've pretended to be concerned. But what exactly do you want to do?" "It's no big deal," Brianna said in a soothing tone, like she was talking to a child. "Just to help you manage your money. Maybe consider some options for your future." "What options?" I tensed, playing the part of a scared old man. "Sunny slopes, for example," Brianna said carefully, watching my reaction. "Dad, this house is too big for you. It costs money to maintain. You'll be safer and more comfortable at Sunnyside." "What's going to happen to the house?" I asked bluntly, looking her in the eye. Brianna stammered a little, but quickly found herself. "We could rent it out. The extra income wouldn't hurt to pay for your stay in a nice boarding house." Lies. An outright lie. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she blushed slightly when she said it. "I don't know, Brianna," I shook my head. "I need to think about it. This is all so sudden." Of course, Daddy. She squeezed my hand. Think about it. In the meantime, maybe I could just help you sort out your current bills? I noticed you have a few unpaid ones. That was a lie. All my bills were paid and I kept very careful track of them, but I decided to play along. Yeah? I must have forgotten. Thank you, darling. Brianna spent the next 2 hours going over my financials. I pretended I didn't really know what was going on, but I kept an eye on what she was doing. She was particularly interested in the bank statement showing my savings. I deliberately left it in plain sight even though I had already transferred most of my money to an account in Mexico. You have good savings, Daddy, she said, looking at the statement. But inflation is eating it up. Maybe you should consider some investments. At my age? I raised my eyebrows skeptically. What would be the point? We could put it in safe bonds, Brianna suggested. Or maybe real estate. Darren was talking about a promising project the other day. Here it is. They're planning to use my money for their investment. I don't know, honey. I rubbed my temples as if I had a headache. It's hard for me to make these decisions right now. Maybe some other time? Brianna was obviously disappointed, but hid it behind a smile. Sure, Dad. You look tired. Why don't you get some rest? I'll fix you something for lunch. I nodded gratefully and retired to my room, where I quietly called Winton. She's here, I whispered into the phone. She's looking into my finances. Already offered to invest my money in some project of Darren's. They're moving faster than we thought, Vinton replied. Be careful, Chambers, and keeping notes of all your conversations. After lunch, Brianna offered to take me to a neurologist for a more detailed examination. I agreed, continuing to play the role of dutiful and increasingly dependent father. The neurologist, Dr. Phelps, was a young specialist with an attentive eye. He administered standardized tests of memory and cognitive function, which I deliberately failed by mixing up number sequences and forgetting simple words. Mr. Morton, he said after the examination, you show signs of moderate cognitive impairment. Given your age and your history of stroke, that's not surprising, but I would recommend further tests. Doctor, Brianna intervened, how serious is my father's condition? Can he make important decisions on his own, like financial decisions? Dr. Phelps paused, looking at me and Brianna. In cases like this, it's best to be safe. If you have power of attorney, Miss Morton, I'd recommend that you temporarily take over your father's financial affairs until we've done all the necessary research. A look of satisfaction flashed across Brianna's face, which she quickly hid. Of course, Doctor. I just want Dad to get the best care possible. When we left the office, Brianna looked enthusiastic. See, Dad, Dr. Phelps agrees that you need help. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything. Thank you, dear. I gave a grateful smile. I always knew I could count on you. That evening, after Brianna left, promising to return in a few days with a solution to all my problems, I called Winton. They got the medical confirmation, I said. Brianna could now officially use power of attorney. Then they'll make their move soon, Vinton replied. Terrence is ready. I warned him that the deal could happen in the next few days. Good, I took a deep breath. How fast do you think they'll act? Judging by their previous actions, very quickly. Vinton sounded concerned. Are you sure you want to see this through, Chambers? Absolutely, I answered firmly. They have chosen this path. My assumptions were correct. 3 days later, I got a call from Brianna. Daddy, I have great news. She sounded overly excited. Darren and I found the perfect place for you at Sunny Slopes. A room has opened up overlooking the garden just the way you like it. Really? I acted surprised. When can I see it? Actually, Brianna faltered a little, you have to act fast. There aren't many rooms like this and there are already other bidders. We paid a deposit to reserve it for you. Prepayment? I let the anxiety creep into my voice. But, Brianna, it must be expensive. Where will the money come from? Don't worry about it, Dad, she said quickly. Darren and I have organized everything. We'll be here on Saturday and you can move in as early as next week. That soon? I deliberately sounded scared. But what about my house? All my stuff? We'll take care of everything, Brianna assured me. You have nothing to worry about. Just prepare the essentials and we'll take care of the rest. After that conversation, I immediately contacted Winton and Terrence. Everything indicated that Brianna and Darren had already started the process of selling the house, maybe even found a buyer. We needed to act quickly. Terrence promised to contact several realtors in town to see if my house was being offered for sale. Winton, using his old connections, planned to see if any paperwork had already been filed at the registry office. I spent the next 2 days preparing for Brianna and Darren's arrival, but instead of packing for the move to the nursing home, I was packing the essentials for the trip to Mexico. At the same time, I was finalizing the last of my financial transactions, transferring the remaining funds into my new account. On Friday, the day before Brianna was supposed to arrive, Winton called me with the news. "Chambers," his voice sounded excited, "you were right. Your house is for sale through Premier Real Estate. The asking price is even lower than the market price, apparently to sell faster." They acted even faster than I thought they would. I felt anger rising inside. They didn't even wait for me to move into that boarding house of theirs. "There's something else," Winton continued. "The papers for the preliminary agreement of sale were filed at the registry office today. The buyer is a corporation called Hawthorne Investments." "Hawthorne?" I couldn't believe my ears. "What's Darren's last name?" "Exactly," Winton confirmed. "It seems your son-in-law decided to buy your house himself using a shell company, probably so he could resell it for a profit." I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. This isn't just betrayal anymore. It's fraud." "Technically, with Brianna's power of attorney, it might be legal," Winton pointed out. "But morally, Chambers, I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said, pulling myself together. "It only confirms that I'm making the right choice. Is Terrence ready?" "Yeah, he's already contacted the agency and expressed interest in buying the house. He's offering 20% above asking price with a quick transaction." The agent took the bait. "Great," I nodded, even though Winton couldn't see me. "So we're going ahead as planned." Saturday morning, I got up early to finalize the last of my preparations. My luggage, one small suitcase and a bag of papers, was stashed in the garage, in an old car I rarely used. My plane ticket to Mexico City was booked for Sunday, early in the morning. I expected Brianna and Darren to arrive by noon, but they didn't show up. Instead, around 3 in the afternoon, a delivery man rang the doorbell and handed me an envelope. Inside was a note from Brianna, written on expensive paper with her initials. "Dear Dad, sorry we couldn't make it as promised. We had an unexpected opportunity that couldn't be missed. Darren has found a great option for your house. The buyer is willing to pay a good price, and we've already started the paperwork process. Don't worry, all the money will go towards ensuring your comfortable stay at Sunny Slopes. In the meantime, Darren and I decided to take a little vacation. We both need a break after all this hassle. We're going to Mexico for 10 days. When we get back, we'll help you move. Your house is sold and I'm off to Mexico with my husband. Bye. Love you, Brianna." I reread the note several times, not believing my eyes. They hadn't even bothered to inform me in person. They just sold my house, the house I'd lived in all my life, and flew off to celebrate with the money from the sale. I dialed Winton's number with hands shaking with anger. "They did it," I said as soon as he answered. "Sold the house and flew to Mexico. Left me a note." "Oh my God," Winton sounded shocked. "I didn't think they'd do something like that, not even to tell you in person." "Exactly." I squeezed the note in my hand. "They're counting on me to accept the sale of the house when they get back. They're going to make it a fait accompli." "What are we going to do?" Winton asked. "What we plan to do," I answered firmly. "Only now we have the added advantage of knowing where they'll be. Mexico." I immediately contacted Terrence, who confirmed that the agency had already informed him of another interested buyer. "But don't worry, Mr. Morton," Terrence assured me. "I've offered a price 30% above their offer, subject to immediate closing. The agent is thrilled. His commission will go up considerably." "What about Hawthorne Investments?" I asked. "They've already backed off," Terrence grinned. "Apparently, they don't want to get into a price war. The agent said they'd agreed to a retreat of 5% of the original price. Darren had taken the money for refusing to buy his father-in-law's own house. It was so cynical that I couldn't even be angry. A strange calmness swept over me. "When can we finalize the deal?" I asked. "As early as Monday," Terrence replied. "I made arrangements with the notary. Since your daughter is acting under a power of attorney, she doesn't have to be present in person. She just needs to submit the certified documents she's already prepared." "Good." I nodded. Then everything was going according to plan. After talking to Terrence, I called Prentice in Mexico City. "Chambers," an old friend, was happy to hear from me. "Good to hear from you. How are your plans coming along?" "They've accelerated," I replied. "My daughter and her husband are already in Mexico. They flew in today or will fly in tomorrow." "That's a twist," Prentice whistled. "Do you know where they're staying?" "No," I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "But I'm guessing some fancy hotel. Darren likes to impress." "There are plenty of those in Mexico City," Prentice said thoughtfully. "But don't worry, we'll find them. I have a couple friends in the tourist police. They can check the registration of foreigners at the major hotels." "You can do that?" I was surprised. "Chambers, you forget I've lived here for 7 years," Prentice laughed. "In Mexico, everything is solved through acquaintances and small thank yous. By the time you arrive, I'll know where your relatives are staying." "Thank you, friend," I was relieved. "I'll be arriving tomorrow on the 11:30 flight, American Airlines flight from Chicago." "I'll meet you at the airport," Prentice promised. "And Chambers, don't worry. Mexico is a great place for a fresh start, even at our age." After that conversation, I finished my preparations, packed the last of my things, checked all my paperwork, booked a cab to the airport for early morning, then sat down in my favorite chair in the living room and took one last look around the room that had witnessed so many events of my life. Here, my wife Eleanor read books on long winter evenings. Here, little Brianna took her first steps. Here we celebrated birthdays, celebrated holidays, experienced sorrow and joy. And now I was leaving this house, betrayed by my own daughter. But instead of bitterness, I felt a strange release. It was as if, along with the house, I was leaving behind all the resentments, all the pain, all the disappointments. Ahead was a new life, new opportunities, and, most importantly, justice. Brianna and Darren are probably enjoying cocktails by the poolside of some luxury hotel in Mexico City right now, celebrating a successful deal. They have no idea that this escape to another country is going to be a real nightmare for them. They don't know that I have anticipated everything in advance and prepared some surprises for them. I smiled, imagining their faces when they realize what has happened. It would be a performance worthy of the finest theater stage. The hot Mexican sun beat down on me as soon as I stepped out of the Mexico City airport terminal. After the chilly spring in Waterloo, it was like dipping into a hot bath. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath, and then I heard a familiar voice. "Chambers, old Seawolf." Prentice Lowell, my former colleague from the waterworks, was waving at me from under the awning. 7 years of living in Mexico had given him tanned skin and a certain relaxed demeanor. Dressed in a light-colored linen shirt and straw hat, he looked like a local, not an American retiree. "Prentice," I smiled as I approached him. "You're looking good. Mexico's obviously doing you good. And you look tired." He shook my hand firmly. "Long flight? Long life," I replied with a chuckle. Prentice took my suitcase and led me to the parking lot where an old but well-maintained Jeep was waiting for us. "I found them," he said as we pulled onto the capital's bustling thoroughfare. Your daughter and her husband are staying at the Grand Mirador. It's one of the most expensive hotels in the city, in the Palenque district. Penthouse suite overlooking Chapultepec Park. I'm not surprised, I nodded. Darren always liked to live large, especially at other people's expense. I have good news for you, Prentice gave me a quick glance. You remember my friend Hector from the tourist police? He's made a deal with the hotel security. We'll be able to watch your relatives without attracting attention. Great, I rubbed my hands together. What about the other part of the plan? It's all organized, Prentice grinned. I've booked you a room at the Casa del Sol. It's a small but very nice hotel right across from the Grand Mirador. From there, you'll be able to see the entrance to their hotel. As for the rest, let's just say your daughter and son-in-law will soon realize that Mexico is not a hospitable place for those who betray their family. I looked out the window at the motley panorama of Mexico City, brightly colored buildings, palm trees, busy streets. It was a whole new world compared to quiet Waterloo. And in this new world, I was no longer a helpless old man to be cheated and tossed to the margins of life. Here I was, master of the situation. Prentice drove me to the Casa del Sol, a cozy three-story colonial-style building with a courtyard and fountain. The room on the third floor did have a great view of the facade of the huge glass Grand Mirador building across the street. I made arrangements with the receptionist, Prentice said as he helped me unpack. Officially, you're my cousin from Chicago, a writer working on a book about Mexico. That would explain your interest in observing the neighborhood. A writer? I laughed. I'm not sure I can play that part convincingly. Trust me, no one will check. Prentice clapped me on the shoulder. The main thing is that your presence will not arouse suspicion. Now, do you want to see your daughter? He took binoculars out of his bag and handed them to me. I went to the window and pointed them at the upper floors of the Grand Mirador. The penthouse on the north side, Prentice prompted. A large terrace with lounge chairs. I pointed my binoculars and saw a large terrace overlooking the park. And there, stretched out on a chaise lounge with a glass in his hand, was Darren. Next to him, under a large umbrella, sat Brianna, reading something on a tablet. They looked relaxed and content, like people who had no worries. Bitterness rose in my throat. Here they are, my daughter and son-in-law, enjoying a vacation with the money from the sale of my house while they think I'm sitting in Waterloo, unaware of the betrayal. I see them, I said, lowering the binoculars. They look happy. For now, Prentice said. But that's about to change. Hector has already launched the first part of our plan. There's going to be a slight glitch in their reservations. What kind of thing? You'll see. Prentice smiled enigmatically. Right now you need to rest after your flight. We'll have a lot of interesting things to do in the evening. In the evening, Prentice returned and we took a position by the window. From here we had a good view not only of the penthouse terrace, but also of the main entrance of the Grand Mirador. There they are. Prentice pointed to a couple coming out of the hotel. They must be on their way to dinner. It's customary to eat dinner late in Mexico. Through the binoculars, I got a good look at Brianna in an elegant evening gown and Darren in a light-colored suit. They got into a cab and drove off. It's time to launch our operation. Prentice pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. Hector? They just left. We're good to go. We spent the next 2 hours having a leisurely dinner on the roof of Casa del Sol, where we could still see the entrance to the Grand Mirador. Prentice talked about his life in Mexico, the local customs, and how he had adapted to a completely new culture. Around 11 p.m., we noticed a cab stopped at the entrance to the Grand Mirador. Brianna and Darren got out of it looking relaxed and content, but their complacent mood was about to change. Watch closely, Prentice whispered, handing me the binoculars. The show is about to begin. Through the glass doors of the lobby, I watched Brianna and Darren approach the front desk. Their faces expressed polite attention at first, then surprise, which quickly changed to indignation. Darren began to gesticulate vigorously. Brianna was hotly arguing something to the receptionist. Even from a distance, it was obvious that the conversation was getting tense. "What's going on?" I asked. "They just got word that there was a booking error," Prentice smirked. Their penthouse was booked for 2 guests at the same time, and the second couple had already checked in while your relatives were having dinner. "So now what?" "Now they'll be offered another room, much less luxurious, or a refund and help finding another hotel. But either way, their evening is ruined." I couldn't hold back a smile as I watched Darren, always so cocky and dismissive, waving his arms and clearly raising his voice at the hotel staff. Brianna stood nearby, arms crossed over her chest, with an expression of extreme displeasure on her face. After half an hour of emotional negotiations, Brianna and Darren, clearly upset, headed for the elevators accompanied by the hotel manager. "They've agreed to another room," Prentice stated. "Well, this is just the beginning of their problems. Tomorrow morning they'll have another surprise waiting for them." I went to bed with a slight sense of satisfaction. The plan had begun to work and the first results were already visible. I knew the ruined reservation was just a minor inconvenience, but it was just the beginning. The next morning, Prentice and I took up position at a cafe across from the Grand Mirador. From here, we had a great view of the hotel entrance and part of the lobby. Around 9 o'clock, Brianna and Darren appeared in the lobby and headed toward the hotel restaurant. They looked a little wrinkled. Apparently, the night in their new room had not been as comfortable as they had hoped. "What now?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Watch." Prentice nodded toward the hotel. A few minutes later, we saw Darren walk up to the front desk, pulling out his wallet. He holds out a credit card to the receptionist, who swipes it through the terminal, then shakes his head. Darren pulls out another card, then another. The result is the same. "His credit cards don't work," Prentice explained. "Hector has arranged with the bank for a temporary lockdown due to suspicious activity, a standard security measure for tourists in Mexico." I watched Darren, clearly furious, argue furiously with the receptionist, then pull out his phone and start making calls. Brianna stands nearby, biting her lip nervously. "The irony," Prentice pointed out, "is that they were probably expecting to pay with the money from the sale of your house. But that money is now in your Mexican bank account." We continued to watch developments over the next hour. Darren called several times, obviously trying to contact the bank. Brianna was also on the phone, occasionally covering her face with her hand in a gesture of despair. "And that's not all." Prentice glanced at his watch. "In half an hour, a man from the tourist police would be approaching them, ostensibly for a routine check of foreigners' documents." As promised, 30 minutes later, 2 men in tourist police uniforms approached Brianna and Darren, still in the hotel lobby. After a brief conversation, they asked to see identification. A verification procedure followed, then an obviously tense dialogue, after which Brianna and Darren, accompanied by the police officers, left the hotel and got into an official car. "They went to the tourist police station," Prentice said, sipping his coffee. "That's where they'll spend most of the day. Paperwork, waiting, uncomfortable chairs, and no information in English. A classic tourist nightmare." "And then what happens?" "Then they'll be released, apologizing for a technical error. But by then they'll be exhausted, hungry, and irritated, the perfect condition for the next part of our plan." By the evening of Brianna and Darren's 4th day in Mexico, everything was ready for the final act of my plan. I spent the morning processing the paperwork for the new villa, a process made surprisingly easy by Prentice's connections and my willingness to pay for everything in cash. I was now the official owner of a small but charming house in the suburbs of Mexico City, with a garden full of citrus trees and a view of the mountains. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" Prentice asked when we met in the lobby of my hotel. "We can wait another day or two. Let them suffer some more." I shook my head. No, it's time to end this story. Besides, I'm tired of being a secret observer. I want to start my new life. Prentice nodded understandingly. Good. Hector has already organized everything. At 7 p.m., a man posing as an American consulate official will meet your daughter and son-in-law in the hotel conference room, ostensibly to discuss their passport situation and suspicious financial transactions. You'll show up at the appointed time and, well, the surprise will be complete. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the meeting. I chose my best suit, light beige, perfect for the local climate. I combed my hair extra carefully. I even spritzed on some cologne I'd bought at a local store. I wanted to look not like a haggard old man, but like a man in control, a man to be reckoned with. At 6:30, Prentice picked me up and we headed to the Grand Mirador. On the way, he gave me another briefing. Hector would be there in the uniform of a tourist police officer. The man posing as a consulate official is his colleague. They'll start the meeting and you'll go in about 10 minutes after it starts. I'll be waiting in the lobby in case anything goes wrong. What could go wrong? I asked. Prentice shrugged his shoulders. You never know. Your son-in-law seems like the temperamental type. Might make a scene. Darren? I grinned. He cares too much about his image to make a public scandal. No, he'd be seething with rage inside, but outwardly, he'd be cold and calculating. We arrived at the hotel 10 minutes before the appointed time. Prentice stayed in the lobby and I went up to the second floor, where the conference room was. The door was slightly ajar and I could hear voices inside. I stopped next to it, in a small alcove where I couldn't be seen, and waited for my moment. At exactly 7, Brianna and Darren walked into the conference room. Through the crack in the door, I could see them looking around nervously. Brianna was pale, with shadows under her eyes, a clear sign of the stress of the last few days. Darren looked focused, but tense as a string. 2 men were already waiting for them in the hall. One, in the uniform of a tourist police officer, Hector. The other, in an austere suit with an American flag on his lapel, was his colleague posing as a consular officer. Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne, the consul, began in perfect English. Thank you for your punctuality. I am Robert Craig, Deputy Consul for Administrative Affairs. This officer is Captain Hector Ramirez of the Mexican Tourist Police. Darren stepped forward, extending his hand. Mr. Craig, we are very grateful for this meeting. The last few days have been extremely frustrating for us. I hope we can clear up the misunderstanding about our passports. It's not really a misunderstanding, Mr. Hawthorne. The consul kept his tone formal. We have received information about suspicious financial transactions involving real estate in Waterloo, Illinois. Transactions in which both of you were directly involved. Brianna turned even paler. I don't know what you're talking about. We just helped my father sell his house. I have a power of attorney. Yes, a power of attorney. The consul nodded. Which authorizes you to act on your father's behalf in the event of his incapacity. But was your father really incapacitated, Mrs. Hawthorne? That was my cue. I took a deep breath, straightened up, and pushed open the conference room door. I assure you, Mr. Craig, I am in perfect health and sanity. Brianna and Darren turned around at the same time. Their faces... I'll never forget the look of absolute shock on their faces. It was like they'd seen a ghost. Dad? Brianna could barely get the word out. Hello, daughter. I walked calmly to the center of the room. Darren. I nodded to my son-in-law, who stood with his mouth open. What are you doing here? Brianna looked like she was about to faint. Vacationing, I smiled. Mexico is a beautiful country, especially when you have the means to enjoy all its delights. Darren was the first to come to his senses. Chambers, I don't understand. You're supposed to be in Waterloo. How did you end up here? Very simply. I sat back in my chair, gesturing for everyone to follow suit. I came by airplane, same day as you, just on a different flight. Brianna sank slowly into the chair. Her knees seemed to have no hold on her. But the note, the house. Ah, yes, the note, I nodded. Your house is sold and I'm off to Mexico with my husband. Bye. Very succinct, almost like a telegram. You've always been practical, Brianna. Darren suddenly tensed, his eyes narrowing. What's going on here? Who are these people? He pointed to the consul and Hector. My friends, I shrugged. Like everyone else who helped make your vacation memorable. Brianna looked at me incomprehensively. Father, I don't understand. What does all this mean? I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely calm. It means, dear daughter, that I knew of your plans. I knew from the beginning how you wanted to sell my house using power of attorney, how you planned to put me in Sunnyside to keep me out of the way, how Darren set up a shell company to buy my house at an undervalued price. That's not true, Brianna exclaimed, but her voice trembled. We meant well. It's dangerous for you to live alone after a stroke. Don't lie, Brianna. I shook my head. I have a recording of Darren's conversation where he discusses how you'll sell the house as soon as the place is vacant. I've seen the Hawthorne Investments documents. I know about the preliminary agreement you signed without saying a word to me. Darren turned pale. You couldn't. I could have, I interrupted him. I'm old, Darren, but I'm not stupid. And I have friends, faithful friends who helped me expose your plan and create my own. What plan? Brianna looked completely confused. I smiled. The plan that is the reason I'm sitting here now and not at Sunny Slopes. The plan that allowed me to sell the house on my terms and get full market value for it. The plan that brought me to Mexico, not as a tourist but as the new owner of a beautiful villa in the suburbs of Mexico City. Darren jumped to his feet. That's impossible. We sold the house. We have the papers. Yes, you sold the house, I nodded, but not to Hawthorne Investments. There was a last-minute buyer, Terrence Clapton, who bid 30% higher, and your realtor, of course, agreed to the better deal. And you, Darren, I recall you even took compensation for backing out of the original deal, 5%, if I'm not mistaken. Darren slumped in his chair, his face turning ashy gray. But the money. Where's the money from the sale? In my account, I smiled. In a Mexican bank. The same one where your cards were blocked because of suspicious activity. Funny coincidence, isn't it? Brianna covered her face with her hands. All this trouble, the hotel, the cards, the police. Was it you? Me and my friends, I nodded at Hector. Captain Ramirez was kind enough to help me arrange for you to have an authentic Mexican experience. Darren suddenly jumped up, his face contorted with rage. You have no right. That money, the house. My house, Darren, I interrupted him calmly. My house that I bought with my own labor. My money that I earned in 42 years of work. My life that you wanted to take from me. Brianna lifted her crying face. Daddy, we didn't mean. We thought. No, Brianna, I shook my head. You weren't thinking about me. You were thinking about money. You were thinking about getting rid of my burden and getting access to my property. I wasn't a father to you. I was an obstacle. There was a heavy silence. Darren stared at the floor, his hands clenching and unclenching. Brianna wept silently. Consul and Hector kept their facial expressions neutral, as befitted officialdom. What now? Darren finally asked. Are you going to sue us? I shook my head. No, Darren. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life litigating. All I wanted was justice, and I got it. But our passports. Brianna started. There's nothing wrong with your passports, I said with a wave of my hand. Nobody confiscated them. You can come back to the States tomorrow. Back to where? Brianna looked lost. The house is sold. You have your own apartment. I shrugged. And as far as I know, a good salary. You'll be fine. Darren looked up, his eyes a mixture of anger and calculation. What about the money from the sale of the house? That's millions of dollars. You can't just. I can, Darren, I interrupted him. I can, and I did. The money from the sale of my house belongs to me now. I used part of it to buy a villa here in Mexico. The rest will provide me with a comfortable life for the rest of my life. And what's left? I paused, looking directly at Brianna. Will go to a charity that supports elderly people who are victims of financial abuse by their relatives. Brianna burst into open tears, no longer hiding her tears. Daddy, please, we can fix this. Come back to Waterloo with us. We'll find a new home. No, Brianna, I shook my head. My life in Waterloo is over. I'm starting a new chapter here in Mexico, without you. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. You're free to go, Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne. You can go home. No one's holding your passports. Darren stood up, his face stony. Let's go, Brianna. There's nothing for us to do here. Brianna got up on shaky legs. Daddy, please. Goodbye, Brianna. I looked at her one last time. I hope you've learned your lesson. Betrayal always has a price. They walked out of the room, Darren with his back straight and head held proudly up, Brianna hunched and broken. As soon as the door closed behind them, Hector and the consul relaxed. Well, how did I do? The consuls asked, smiling. Convincing enough? Perfect, I shook his hand. Thank you, Jorge. And you, Captain Ramirez. Without your help, none of this would have been possible. Hector nodded. Glad to help, Senor Morton. Family is sacred, and those who betray family deserve a lesson. We left the conference room and went down to the lobby where Prentice was waiting for us. Judging by the looks on Brianna's and Darren's faces that just passed me, it went well, he said. More than successful, I nodded. They've been destroyed. So what now? Prentice asked as we left the hotel. I took a deep breath of Mexico City's warm evening air. Now I'm going to live, Prentice, really live. The next morning, Prentice picked me up to take me to my new villa. On the way, we stopped at a cafe for breakfast. They flew out, Prentice said, looking at a message on his phone. Hector checked it. Brianna and Darren were on the morning flight to Chicago. Good, I nodded, sipping my flavored Mexican coffee. So that chapter's closed then. No regrets? Prentice looked at me carefully. It's your daughter, after all, an only child. I thought about it for a moment. You know, Prentice, I regret a lot of things in my life. Not traveling more when I was younger, about spending too much time at work and too little time with my family, about not being honest enough with Eleanor when she was alive. But about that, I shook my head. No, I didn't regret it. They made their choice. I made mine. We reached my new villa around noon. It was a charming one-story Spanish colonial-style house with white walls, a red tile roof, and a patio with a small fountain. A garden of orange and lemon trees surrounded the house, and the terrace overlooked the mountains in the distance. Welcome home, Chambers. Prentice smiled broadly as he handed me the keys. I walked inside, looking around the spacious rooms with high ceilings, terracotta floors, and dark wood furniture. The house was fully furnished. The previous owners had left everything from the kitchen utensils to the books on the shelves. In the master bedroom, I walked over to the window overlooking the garden. The sunlight filtering through the leaves of the orange trees created intricate patterns on the floor. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang. The scent of flowers and ripe fruit wafted through the air. I thought of Brianna and Darren returning to cold Waterloo, to their empty apartment, about how they would explain to everyone why their plans had suddenly changed, about how they would have to live with the realization that their betrayal had backfired on themselves. But these thoughts didn't bring me the satisfaction I expected. Instead, I felt a strange release. It was as if the heavy weight I had been carrying for years was suddenly gone, a weight of expectations, disappointments, unspoken resentments. Are you all right? Prentice asked, noticing my thoughtfulness. Yeah, I smiled, just realizing that at 77, I'm finally free. Free from the past, from toxic relationships, from feeling indebted to people who don't appreciate it. What are you going to do with that freedom? I walked to the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. Live, Prentice. Just live. Maybe start writing my memoirs, or learn how to cook Mexican food, or maybe I'll just sit on the patio, drink tequila, and watch the sunset. For the first time in my life, I have no obligations, no expectations to meet, just me and the time I have left. Prentice claps me on the shoulder. Sounds like a great plan. And you know what? I'm glad you're here. It's always good to have an old friend around. That evening, I sat on the terrace of my new villa, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the glass in front of me shimmered the tequila that Prentice called the best in Mexico City. On the table was a book that I began to read, a history of Mexico written in plain and simple language. I thought about my life, about all the twists and turns and crossroads that had brought me here, on this terrace, at this moment. About my childhood in a small Midwestern town, about the years of school and work, of meeting Eleanor and giving birth to Brianna, years in Waterloo, where every day was like the last. And now, at an age when most people have given up on new beginnings, I have started my life anew, in a new country, with a new language, with new opportunities. It may have been the bravest thing I've ever done, but it was also the right thing to do. I raised my glass, silently saluting the setting sun and the coming night. To new beginnings, I whispered, and to never being too late to start over.